Now, Sky News has learned that staff at the Department for Work and Pensions were given a so-called deflection script to send universal credit claimants online when they called to say their payments hadn't come through. A document has emerged for call handlers to follow, which the department had previously said did not exist. Well, the government insists it has not tried to rush callers off the phone, but has a response to the troubled policy been good enough? Well, I'm joined now by Alfie Stirling, Head of Economics at the New Economics Foundation, and alongside him is Ed Davies, Policy Director at the Centre for Social Justice. Gentlemen, many thanks indeed for joining us this afternoon. Alfie, if I could firstly start with you, what do you make of these so-called deflection scripts?
Well, I think, unfortunately, it's symptomatic of a much broader trend that we've seen ever since universal credit started to be rolled out, which is and it's something that the National Audit Office actually commented on last year, which is that the DWP, Department for Work and Pensions, has really shown a disregard for the impacts of their own errors in trying to run out this major reform. And it's that word disregard for the pain that it's caused and a lack of flexibility to the issues that have been caused to people that are really struggling. It's one of the most vulnerable people in society that has been a major problem here. And what we're seeing today is that a system that was supposed to be incredibly simple nonetheless engendered thousands of calls to report problems, and DWP were not prepared to listen. And
remind us of some of the main problems that people have faced.
I think one of the biggest issues with implementation has been delayed payments. So around 25% of people that have come onto universal credit have not received anything for 4 weeks or more. And these are people that before that were moving week to week just to get by. So to go for 4 weeks without a payment has been really serious. It's pushed people into arrears. It's increased homelessness, it's pushed up the poverty numbers. But I think it's also really important here because it's very easy to get dragged into a conversation around all these implementation challenges. Has the government been competent in rolling out this new system? But actually there are really fundamental questions we should be asking of universal credit as well, which is, even if it were rolled out, would it be delivering on its initial objectives? And also, are those objectives the right objectives for a 21st century social security system?
Ed Davies, so universal credit, according to Alfie, is very much a downward spiral for many people, and it's very hard to change that.
I agree with Alfie to one extent that it's quite important not to get too detailed and talking about the implementation changes, but I disagree when he sort of says that the problem is the bigger thing. I think actually that is where we need to focus, and that is where things are going well. So, the early pilots on universal credit show that you're about 7% more likely to find a job. That, as a statistic, that doesn't mean a huge amount. So what that actually means is when this is rolled out, that is a city the size of Newcastle finding work. If we sort of throw this out and throw out the baby with the bathwater, we effectively give a redundancy notice to a city the size of Newcastle. So it's really important that we keep that in mind when we talk about universal credit, that this is a good thing, and when it's out and running well, it has the potential to really change lives.
Isn't the problem here for many people that if you've got to wait, say, 5 weeks to get your first payment, you're going to be faced with a very difficult decision to make? Either you're forced to put food on the table, or you need to make that decision about whether you pay your rent or not. Some people just can't do both.
Yeah, I think credit to Amber Rudd here, actually, who steps in as the Work and Pensions Secretary and just a couple of weeks ago made an announcement on this, that they're going to pilot more regular fortnightly payments as well. And I think that's really good news. It's probably underknown that there are a lot of people already on fortnightly payments. There are people getting advance payments. There are people having payments even more regular than that. But it's great that we now have a Secretary of State that has acknowledged this is an issue and is going to push it out more widely. So I think we can expect to see some good change there.
Alfie, do you take issue with the principle of universal credit? Because it is going to get some 200,000 people back into work.
I do take an issue with the principle, but before going into that, I want to just pick up on something Ed said there, which is that he's expecting to see 7% increase in employment as a result of universal credit. Now, those figures have actually been entirely discredited. The National Audit Office last year reported that government had confirmed to them that they do not actually know the outcomes of universal credit. They can't know because they can't isolate the effects from other economic changes. And that those numbers, that 7%, the people that refer to moving into work, came only from very small pilot tests that are not representative of the scheme as a whole. It only focused on the most straightforward claimants, the people that were in the best position to move into work anyway. But in terms of broader principles, I think they are wrong. I think that in a world where we see family structures changing, we're seeing a breakdown of the traditional male breadwinner model. We need to be thinking about, are we helping two people to move into work if they want to? And this is just one example. Universal credit massively disfavours a second earner in a household that disproportionately is a woman, and is letting down British society on gender roles.
Ed Davies? Ed?
I mean, it's very difficult for me to respond to that because I disagree with so much of it, I suppose. I suppose, firstly, just picking up on that, whether this is going to be an improvement, there almost seems to be this narrative now that work is a bad thing that government is forcing people into. It's not. Work is a good thing, that actually having a job, bringing you out of poverty, it is still the best way out of poverty. It is really important that we find this work for people. It is an improvement on your physical health. It helps you improve your mental health. It gives you dignity. It gives you purpose. It gives you mission. Anything we can do to help that is a good thing. And we can quibble on here about 7%, 6%. Were they easy cases? Were they hard cases? What about the National Audit Office? The bottom line is you had a situation where it did not pay to work under the old system. And if we go back to that, we are talking about hundreds of thousands of families who are trapped in a welfare system where they cannot reach their potential, where they cannot find work. I was in a women's refuge the other day, and I spoke to the lady who ran that, and she said, look, I could get people out of abusive relationships, I could get them into work, but I could not get them above 16 hours. Universal credit has changed that. If we sit here and argue about whether or not to get rid of it, we jeopardise those changes, and that would be a travesty.
Alfie?
It sounds great when Ed kind of takes words out of the business case for universal credit that was written by government, but unfortunately evidence doesn't actually back up what he's saying. He may have anecdotal examples, but the government admits that it does not have the evidence to back that up. But what you can see is if you look at particular cases, so take an example of somebody on a minimum wage job, and they're moving into an extra hour of work or upping pay by an extra hour, under universal credit, because it pulls back benefits at 63p in the pound for every pound you earn, you actually now face losing 75p of that pound that you earn.
Okay.
So it's not actually delivering the work incentives that it set out to do.
So what would you replace universal credit with if you could?
So I think we need to think much more broadly about tax and benefits together. For example, we have a system in the tax system which is nominally trying to help people on low income. It's called the personal allowance. It costs £100 billion. And that's an example of where we could think about, could that £100 billion be spent more effectively? Could you pay people in or out of work a bit more money to make sure they've got a cushion so that they can re-enter the labour market without losing all their benefits, and allow them to enter work on their own terms? Because an important point here is the UK has quite a unique problem of low pay, no pay, people moving from low paid work into no work and staying in a poverty cycle. And part of the problem here is that we've got a social security system that's designed to keep the unemployment number down, but doesn't care too much about the types of jobs it forces people into.
Ed Davies, would a suggestion or proposal such as Alfie's work, is that something that you would welcome?
I actually think, the last thing you said there, I'd actually quite agree with, that we do have a problem of progression in work. I think universal credit is considerable improvement on what we had. So he said, there are marginal tax rates still of over 70%. Well, it was over 90% under the old system, and we've definitely improved that. But I think he is right that there is some questions about how we can improve actually progression within work once people are in work. And I think that goes to a much wider conversation. We're talking there about education. We're talking about in-work training. We are, as you mentioned, we are talking about family support, childcare, that kind of thing. Have we got that right? And I think that's probably a very important conversation for us to have.
An interesting conversation. Alfie Stirling, Ed Davies, gentlemen, many thanks indeed for your time this afternoon. Thank you.